We're learning Sicha Beis and Chelek Yates from Parshas Vaeschanan on page 47. This is a deep Sicha. The subject is the mitzvah of Tefillin, which appears in this week's Parsha and earlier, the first time in the Torah in Parshas Bai. And the Rabbi will explain here a halacha in three different taifanim based on a Gemara, a Mechilta, and a Sefri. Wegen der Seder Anochas Tefillin. Regarding the order of how you put on the tefillin, in other words, is the tefillin shel yad and the tefillin shel rosh. So regarding the order of how you put them on, zok the Gemara says as follows. Tane, we learned in the Braise, kishu maniach, when you put on tefillin, maniach shel yad, va'achakach maniach shel rosh. First you put on the shel yad, and then the tefillin shel rosh. Kishu chaylitz, when you remove the tefillin, chaylitz shel rosh, you take off the shel rosh first, va'achakach chaylitz shel yad. And then you take off the shel yad. So then the Gemara asks on this. This is the Braise. So the question is, Bishloime kishu maniach shel yad v'achkach maniach shel rosh. It's understood why the halacha is that when you put on the shel yad, so that comes first, and then the shel rosh, the chsiv, that's the order in the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Ukshartam lo yisal yedecha, v'hadar v'hoyel tetafis beinecha." Only following first, you should tie the tefillin on your arm, and then that the tefillin should be on your head. But ela kashu chaylitz shel rosh, v'achka chaylitz shel yad minolan. The second halacha that it says is that when you remove the tefillin, you first remove the shel rosh and then the shel yad. From where do we know this? Omar Rabbi. So Rabbi explained, Rav Huna asberali. Rav Huna explained this to me. Omar Kra, because the pasuk regarding the shel rosh says, v'hoyu l'toitafos beinei necha, kol zman shebeinei necha yiyu shtayim. From this pasuk we see that as long as you're wearing the tefillin shel rosh, you have to have two pairs of tefillin. In other words, not two pairs, but you have to have the tefillin shel yad. You have to have two tefillins, the tefillin shel rosh, together with the tefillin shel yad on your body. Rashi explains the meaning of this drasha. V'hoyu mashma shtayim. V'hoyu is written in the plural term, which means two. What is two if it's referring only to the tefillin shel rosh? Kozman sheyu b'nei necha. As long as you have the tefillin on your head, between your eyes, you shtayim should have two tefillins on you. Kozman she'oisen shel rosh menachin. As long as the tefillin shel rosh is on your body, oisen shel yad nami menachin. The tefillin shel yad you should also be wearing it. Almed the rosh cholitz bereisha. So therefore, from here we see that you have to remove the shel rosh first. Pirish Rashi, because if you want to have the shel rosh, you don't want to have the shel rosh in your body alone without the shel yad, so you can't remove the shel yad first. That's the source, as Rashi explains it, based on the Gemara there. Now the pshat, and then the teaching the words of the Gemara, v'hoyu. In Mechilta, oifim pasik, v'hoya l'cha l'ois hayatcha. The Mechilta explains the pasik, and this is in Parshas Bai, where it says that the tefillin will be a sign on your hands, on your arm. Shtei, so the Mechilta says as follows. Kol zman shel tefillin shel yad biyad, ten shel rosh berosh. When you have the tefillin shel yad first on your hand, then is when you should put the tefillin shel rosh onto your head. Because of this order in the pasuk, it says v'haya l'chala isal yadcha, and then it says l'zikarim beinei necha. So when you have the tefillin shel yad, then you put on afterwards the tefillin shel rosh. From here we learn out mitzvahs tefillin, that the mitzvah of tefillin is kishu neisen shel yad. When he puts on the tefillin, first he puts on the shel yad, v'achakach neisen shel rosh. Then he puts on the shel rosh. When he removes the tefillin, chaylitz shel rosh, he removes the shel rosh first, v'achakach shel yad. Then he removes the shel yad. So the Rabbi will focus here on the difference between the way the Gemara learns out the halacha and the way the Mechilta learns out the halacha. From verstehen, so we have to understand there as follows. Aleph, number one, was is the time was the Gemara lernt heraus dem Seder von Anochas Tefillin von dem Pasuk Ukshartam v'hoya geimen shebe Parshas Seinu. So what's the reason for this? That the Gemara learns out this halacha about the order of putting on shel yad first and then shel rosh from the pasuk that it says in our parsha here, Ukshartam. Und nicht von dem pasuk was steht früher, and not from the order in the pasuk that it's written earlier in Parshas Bai, wo the mitzvah von Tefillin wird angesagt zum ersten Mal, where the mitzvah of Tefillin is said in the Torah for the very first time, wie in Mechilta, like it is in the Mechilta, that it's learned out from that pasuk. So what's the difference? Why would the Gemara not learn it out from the very first time that it's written? Beis, another question. From Pashtus HaGemara zetais, you look in the Gemara, it would simply seem as medafan kommen zu zwei lemudim, that we need over here two different psukim to teach me regarding putting on the tefillin, the order, and also regarding removing the tefillin. Ein limud of them din kishu maniach shal yad v'achkach maniach shal rosh, that you put on the shal rosh, the shal yad that is, before the shal rosh. Und aber zunde limud of them din kishu chaylitz shal rosh v'achkach chaylitz shal yad. Another limud from Vahayu, first you learn from the order in the pasuk, Ukshartam, and then Vahayu. And the second limud you learn out from the plural term Vahayu. And from that we see Kishu Chaylitz, that when you remove the tefillin, Chaylitz shal rosh, v'achaka Chaylitz shal yad. Mashenkin leute mechilte is beide dinim werden gelernt von denselben limud. In the mechilte though, he learns out both halachas regarding putting on, the order of putting on the tefillin, and the order of removing the tefillin from the same pasuk, one limud, the order of the pasuk, v'haya l'cha la'isa yadcha u'lizikarim beinenecha, that tells you that when you have the shal yad on your body, that's when the shal rosh should be on your body. So therefore you understand both, that you have to put the shal yad on first and don't remove the shal yad first. So what's the pshat in the Gemara then? Why does the Gemara require two different limudim to teach me this halacha here? L'chayre wollt me gekent verenferen, kushya achas bechaverta. So to answer both of these questions, seemingly we could answer one question with the other. Ubahagtim, levayer, so first let's explain, leite mechilte, another point that needs clarification according to mechilte, wie azay lernt na reis vom pasik, euch dem zweiten prat, ukishu chaylitz shel rosh v'achkach shel yad. How is it that the mechilte is able to learn out from this one pasik both details regarding the tefillin, not only the order? I mean, the pasuk is simply speaking about the mitzvah of putting on the tefillin. And what's the order in putting it on? It's not speaking about removing the tefillin. But the Mechilta says that from this one pasuk, I also learn out the order regarding removing the tefillin. How? In other words, the question of the Gemara is correct. Just like from the pasuk Ukshartam, you could only learn out the order in putting on the tefillin, and therefore the Gemara needs to bring another diuk of Vahayu to learn out regarding removing the tefillin. So the same is with the pasuk Vahayu l'chala isla yatcha. The limud there is also because of the order in the pasuk. So you could only learn out the order in the mitzvah of putting it on. But that's not what it says in the Mechilta. The Mechilta says you could learn out from this pasuk also the order in taking them off. How is that? So the explanation is as follows. Der Chiluk zwischen der Tzivui Vahayu l'chala isla yatcha in Parshas Kadesh. Und der Tzivui ukshartem loisal yedecha shebe Parshasenu. What's the difference if you look closely into the wording of these two mitzvahs that the Torah commands to put on tefillin in the language of the pasuk Vahayu l'chala isla yatcha and the language of the pasuk ukshartem loisal yedecha that's in this week's parsha? So it's as follows. The Parshasenu is the mitzvah asiyas akshire sha'ala adam. In the pasuk here, ukshartam, what does the pasuk say? Ukshartam la'isal yedecha. The Torah is telling you the person, the mitzvah that he has to tie the tefillin, the action that he has to do to tie the tefillin on his hand. That's the focus of this pasuk. Mashenkin in pasuk Parshas Kadesh, which is not the case with the pasuk that it says in the parsha of Kadesh in Parshas Boi. So there is that tzivui v'hoya. There the pasuk is not referring to the person that's doing an action. Over there it talks about what will be, what should be. As the tefillin sollen sein, la'oisal yadcha u'lizikarim beinenecha. That the mitzvah is to see to it that the fact of the tefillin being on your body should be. That the tefillin should be on your arm, it should be on your head. It's not talking about the action. To say this in other words, in the common terminology used regarding such a subject, der pasuk b'Parshasenu red wegen gavra. The pasuk here in this week's parsha is speaking about the action that the person has to do. B'Parshas Kadesh, v'hoya l'chala isal yadcha wegen chefze. In Parshas Kadesh, the Torah speaks about the actual tefillin themselves. The Eibishter wants that the tefillin should be on your arm. It's not talking about the action of the person tying the tefillin and placing it on his head, but it's talking about where the tefillin are intended to be on the person's body. That's the difference. So it's a different focus in what the pasuk is speaking about. So now, on Hayais, the Gemara read wegen dem Seder Anachas Tefillin. So now the Gemara is talking about the order of putting on Tefillin mitzad dem Chiyuv Gavra, speaking about the obligation that the person has and the action that he has to do. When he does this action, the obligation the person has, what's the action that he has to do? Kishu maniach Maniach shel yad, v'achar kach maniach shel rosh. That when you're doing the mitzvah, the action of putting on the tefillin, so you follow the order in the pasuk. First the shel yad and then the shel rosh. So therefore, since the Gemara is focusing on the action of the person, lernt es the Gemara arais from the pasuk, which is the mitzvah samaniach. Therefore, it learns it out from the pasuk in this week's parsha, where it emphasizes the action that the person has to do. So that's why the Gemara chooses to learn it out from the pasuk in this week's parsha, and not from the first time the Torah speaks about the mitzvah of tefillin and parshas boy, because it wants to tell you the source for the order of the mitzvah that the person has to do. Now this also explains and answers the other question. You have to have a separate source for the order of removing the tefillin from the word v'hayu. Because if the whole limud is just regarding the order of the action of putting the tefillin on your hand, you can't learn out anything from there regarding the order of removing the tefillin. There's a source in the Torah for the order of the action of putting on. How is that connected to the order of removing? So you have to have another source for that. In Mechilta ber retzach nit wegen mitzvahs hanochas tefillin mitzad hagavra. In the Mechilta, though, he's not focusing on the action that the person does, that he puts the tefillin on his arm. Nor wie the tefillin als chefze zenin la'ois al yadcha ol lizikarim beninecha. Speaking about the object of the tefillin itself, the fact that the tefillin are a sign on your hands, it's found on your hands, and it's also on your head. The far is the limud from pasuk v'hoylach halois al yadcha as kol zman shet tefillin shel yad biyad. Ten shel rosh berosh. So therefore, according to the Mechilta, the source, the limud of here in this pasuk, which is focused on the position of the tefillin being on the person's hand and being on the person's head. And what do we learn out from the pasuk? From the fact that the Torah writes it in this order, we learn out that as long as the tefillin is on the hand, then the tefillin should be on the head. So from here we know both. So automatically we understand regarding both times. When you put on that tefillin, first the shel yad and then the shel rosh. And that when you remove, first you remove the shel rosh and then the shel yad. Regarding this, that the tefillin being on your body, that the shel rosh should be on your body only while the shel yad is on your hand, which we learn out from the order in the pasuk. Since it says first v'hoya la'is al yadcha, so only when the tefillin is on the hand, then the shel rosh should be on your head. Is kein chilek zwischen hanocha the chalitzas tefillin. There's no difference regarding the action in the beginning and the action in the end, removing. The point is that the shel yad should be on your body before the shel rosh, for the shel rosh to be there only when the shel yad is there. You have to do the action of placing the tefillin shel yad on first, and you have to remove the tefillin shel yad only after the shel rosh. So therefore, it's all one limud. So basically, the Rebbe explained to us that the difference between the limudim of the Gemara and the Mechilta is the reason also for the difference why the Mechilta requires only one drasha, and the Gemara requires two different drashas. Fits perfectly. However, the Rebbe says, "Es ist aber schwer, so einzulernen." It's difficult to explain the difference between the Gemara and the Mechilta this way. Varom, since as follows. So first the Rebbe brings noisif of them, in addition to the fact, was lefizeh is nidglatik has cholas aloshen from their Mechilta. According to this pshat, that the Mechilta is not focusing on an action. It's not focusing on the action of putting the tefillin on your arm. It's focusing on the mitzias of the tefillin being on your arm. So there's something that's not smooth there in the language of the Mechilta. Kozman shel tefillin shel yad biyad. As long as you have the tefillin shel yad in your hand, then 10 is shel rosh berosh. Then you should place the shel rosh on the head. According to the point that we said before, that in the Mechilta he's not talking about the action b'chlal. He's not telling you what you should do first and what you should do second. Hatte gedacht sagen, the language of the Mechilta would be more precise if it would say ubesei the hafuch, and it would be in the reverse order. Tiyeh shel rosh berosh, that the shel rosh should be found, it should be on your body. Kol zman chulu, as long as the tefillin shel yad is already there. In other words, we're focusing on the mitzias of when the shel rosh should be placed on your body. from the order of the pasuk, we understand that we don't want the shorosh to be on the body without the shayat being there first. So therefore, the focus here is it's a requirement of the mitzias of the shorosh. The mitzias of the shorosh being on your body is dependent on the fact that you have the shayat already on your body. That should have been the language here of the mechilta. So this is the language that's focusing on the mitzias of the tefillin being on your body. And not a language that's speaking about the action that the person does, placing it on his body. That's one problem with this pshat. Besides this, gefindt men, we find, as in Sifri beparsha seinu. So there's another medrash, the Sifri in this week's parsha, steht derselbe Lashon wie in Mechilte. The Sifri uses a very similar language to what it says in the Mechilte. Kol zman shel yad biyad, ten shel rosh berosh. As long as when you have the shel yad on your hands, then you place the shel rosh on the head. When you put on the tefillin, put on the shel yad first, and then only following that you put on the shel rosh. Chaylitz is shel rosh, and when you remove the tefillin, remove the shel rosh first, and only following that you should remove the shel yad. So this is pretty much very similar to the language that it says in the Mechilte. And afal pikein, and yet, lernt es the Sifri arois from the pasuk shebeparsha seinu. The Sifri, that is, still learns it out from the pasuk that it says in this week's parsha. Ukshartam la'oisal yadecha v'hoyel l'titav es beinenecha. Even though it's the same lashon like the Mechilte, focusing on the actual mitzias of the tefillin being found on the person's body, but yet at the same time it's learned out from the pasuk Ukshartam, was red wegen the chiyuv mitzvahs hanachas tefillin shalal adam, which focuses on the action that the person does, doing the mitzvah of placing the tefillin on the person's body. So the question is, you can't make this distinction between the Gemara and the Sifri, that the Gemara is focusing on the action of the person, and the Mechilte, that is focusing on the mitzias of the tefillin being on the body, if the Sifri uses the same language as the Mechilte, and yet it learns it out from the pasuk that it says in the Gemara, from Ukshartam. So therefore this pshat is seemingly incorrect. Another question here is, B'Gemara Gufa. Let's go back to the Gemara itself and focus on the limud, the way it's learned out in the Gemara. La'achadem, as from Vahoyu, learn the Gemara up, as kol zman shebein necha. Just a moment, sorry. Excuse me? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm here outdoors. I'm going to try to focus on the learning. So after the Gemara learns out from Vahoyu, as kol zman shebein necha yiyu shtayim, that as long as a person, again, the Gemara learns out from Vahoyu, that as long as you have the tefillin shel rosh, you should have the tefillin shel yad on your body as well. So now, once we know that, it's geshein v'mahai taime versteht men as keshu chaylitz shel rosh v'achka chaylitz shel yad wie the Gemara sagt. So if this is a source for the fact that when you remove the tefillin, you should remove the shel rosh first and then the shel yad, because you have to have the shel yad on your body every moment that you're wearing the shel rosh. So doesn't this automatically also tell you that when you put the tefillin on, you have to put on the tefillin shel yad first and then the shel rosh? Like the Mechilte says, that the shel yad comes first, or the Mechilte says that it's just one drasha for both points. So if so, the question is, tzilibvas darf the Gemara dem limud von seder atzivuyim v'kshartem loisal yadecha v'hoyel titavis beinen necha. So the limud that the Gemara says in the beginning, that we learn it out from the order that it's written in the pasuk, first the kshartam and then v'hoyu. Who needs the order of this limud this way? Why is it necessary to have this limud? Once you have the second limud that the Gemara says v'hoyu, so I know that the shel rosh could only be on the body when you have the shel yad on your hands. So you don't need the two drashas b'chlal. So now the Rebbe, based on this last question there, the Rebbe says, seemingly we could say, as ena chanami, yes, this is actually true. Lefia maskana, according to the conclusion of the Gemara, let it mintaka up, beide dinim, the Gemara learns out both of these halachas, sai kishemaniach maniach shel yad, vachkach maniach shel rosh, the halacha of putting on the shel yad first and then the shel rosh. And also the halacha that when you remove the tefillin, you remove the shalosh and then the shalyat. From them was amakrava hayule tetavas beinenecha, because manshe beinenecha yishtayim. They're both learned out from this that it says in the Torah v'hayu, a plural term that you should only wear the shalosh while you have the shalyat. We actually find this in Paiskim, that they explain it this way, that it's all learned out from one pasuk, from the Vahayu. Und demolt is das euch massen mit der Drasche von Sefri anal. And this fits also with the Drasche that it says in the Sefri, where the Sefri quotes a language that's similar to the Mechilta, that you learn it out just from one Drasche. You're not learning it out from two different Drashes. And that one Drashe tells you both regarding putting on the tefillin and removing the tefillin. That's the maskana de Gemara. But if this is the pshat, lefizevet noch schwerer de kushya nal. If so, the question that we asked before becomes even more difficult to understand. We bald as sof learn the Gemara up. Beide dinim von ein limud v'hoyu. If it's true that in the Gemara you learn out both of the halachas, putting on the tefillin, removing the tefillin from v'hoyu, wie the mechilta, just like in the mechilta that it's all learned from one pasuk. Hein favos lernt as the Gemara on the Sefri nitarais from the friedigem pasuk in Parshas Kadesh kedrashas hamechilta. So why don't we learn this all out from the pasuk that it says in Parshas Boy, like the mechilta that's learning it out from one pasuk there, both halachas? So that question becomes even stronger. Now the Rebbe focuses on something else. Before we come to the answer, the Rebbe has another question here. Oich fadet sich hasbare in die beis efani limud. Okay, this is still a continuation to before. The Rebbe has another follow-up question here, actually, that we need to explain. In the beis efani limud, the two efanim that we're learning out, the drasha of the mechilta and the drasha of the Gemara. So, what's the difference between which pasuk you learn it out from? See, the chilek zwischen ze is na mashma darshan. Is the whole difference just a matter of the source of the pasuk? If I dash in this pasuk or another pasuk, but it's really one and the same thing. It's the very same din that I'm learning out. This is done af gemina la halacha from welchem pasuk melernt das heraus. Or maybe there's actually a real difference that's relevant la halacha that I learn that will come out from the source of where I learn it out, from this pasuk or the other pasuk. So now the Rebbe focuses on the Mechilta versus the Sefri. Until here we were focusing on the difference between the Mechilta and the Gemara. But now the Rebbe says, although it seems like the Sefri is saying the exact same thing as the Mechilta, but if you look closer we'll see two differences in the language of the Sefri and the Mechilta. We also find differences in the language of the Mechilta and in the Sefri. Aleph, the first difference is, in Mechilta is the Lashon Mikan Omru Mitzvahs Tefillin Cholu. In the Mechilta it says the Lashon, from here I learned that the mitzvah of Tefillin is so and so, to put on the Shalyat first and then the Shalosh. So it begins with this introduction, Mitzvahs Tefillin. This is the mitzvah of Tefillin. In the Sefri it's a different language. Mikan Omru, from here we learn Keshenaisen Tefillin. When the person puts on the Tefillin, the order should be so and so, first Shalyat and then Shalosh. What's the difference between these two lashonos? Beis, in Sefri is Moisef. The Sefri adds Keshenaisen Tefillin, Naisen Shalyat Chila. The Sefri adds the word Tchila. When you put on the Shalyat first. Or Keshechaylet Shalosh Tchila. When you remove the Tefillin, you remove the Shalosh first. Mashenken in Mechilta. In Mechilta, you don't have this emphasis. You don't have this extra word of Tchila. It's self-understood. It says first Shalyat and then Shalosh. It doesn't have to say the word Chila. But the Sefri says the word Chila. What's the difference? So to understand all of this, the explanation here is as follows. So basically the Rebbe will explain here how you have the Gemara's drasha, the Mechilta's drasha, and the Sefri. These are three different drashas, three different approaches to understanding the pshat in this halacha of putting on shalyat first and then shalosh. It's really only two drashas. I mean, the Gemara and the Sefri both learn it out from Ukshartam. The Mechilta learns it out from Vahoyel, Vaeschanan, and Parshas Boy. But the definition of this halacha is defined in three different ways, as the Rebbe will point out very beautifully in the language of the Gemara, Sefri, and Mechilta. Das was Tefillin shalyat darf me makdim sein, far anoches Tefillin shalosh. This halacha that you have to put on the Tefillin shalyat before the shalosh. Afal pi as zenet zwei mitzvahs. Although these are two different mitzvahs. Un einan ma'akve zu. They actually are not dependent one on another. If one has only Tefillin shalyat and not shalosh, or the reverse, you put on one without the other. Could be explained and defined in one of three ways. Aleph, one way is das is adin mit tefillin shel rosh. This is all a requirement because of the tefillin shel rosh, which means as follows: the shleimus ha-mitzvah from tefillin shel rosh is to do the mitzvah of tefillin shel rosh completely, properly. Is nar b'shas of their hand is da the shel yad. Is only if you have already the tefillin shel yad on your hand, and then you put on the tefillin shel rosh. So therefore, before you put on the tefillin shel rosh, you have to first put on the shel yad. The point is not the order. The point is not the order of how you're putting on the tefillin. That doesn't matter. There's no requirement of the order one way or another. The point simply over here is that this is a shleimus of the shel rosh. You could put the shel rosh on the body alone, or you put the shel rosh after you already have the shel yad on your body. When you have the shel yad first, that's a shleimus in the mitzvah of the tefillin shel rosh. That's one eifn. Beis, another eifn, is a din in dem seide wie the gavre daf legen the tefillin. It is a din in the order. You have the two mitzvahs, tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel rosh. And the Torah over here is telling the person, these two mitzvahs, each one is a mitzvah for itself, that you have to place it on your body. That's the mitzvah. Okay. Now there's another point there. There's an additional thing that we tell the person, that when you do these two mitzvahs, the order that you should do these two mitzvahs is as follows. Friya dafaleg and tefillin shel yad, and danach tefillin shel rosh. First shel yad and then shel rosh. So this is actually a halacha about the order of how these two mitzvahs should be fulfilled. Das heißt, das ist nicht negeya zu der mitzvah von tefillin shel rosh. This order is not because this is relevant for the full completion of the mitzvah of tefillin shel rosh. It's not a shleimus in this shel rosh. Und nicht nicht zu der tefillin shel yad, and it's not also a order that's relevant to the fulfillment of the mitzvah of the shel yad. There's the mitzvah. The mitzvah of shel rosh and shel yad is that it should be on your body, on the head, on the arm. That's the mitzvah. But then there's an additional thing. The Eibishter comes and says, you have these two mitzvahs, and you as a person, when you do these mitzvahs, there's a chiv and the gavra, an additional point that these two mitzvahs should be done in the following order. Naradin and seder anachasan al yedei ha'adam ha'manichan. A halacha regarding the person that's fulfilling these two mitzvahs to put on the shel yad first and then the shel rosh. That's the pshat in this. That's the second eifn. So beferish is a halacha in the seder. That's one point of the second eifn. And the second point in the second eifn is, it's only a halacha in the seder, and not a halacha that's relevant to the very mitzvah itself. The very mitzvah is to put on the shel rosh and the shel yad. This is an additional inyan that's focused to the gavra. You're going to be doing these two mitzvahs. When you come to do these two mitzvahs, you should do it in the following order. Then comes the third eifn, which will come soon, but first the Rabbi will tell us a nafkemina la halacha, the pile between the first and second eifn. Eine von den nafkeminas bepashtos zwischen die zwei Fanim is. So one of the very simple differences between these two approaches. If one put on both pairs of tefillin, the shel yad and the shel rosh, at the same time. So according to the first way, the first approach, as das is negeya nar zu shleimus ha-mitzvah von tefillin shel rosh. The main point here is, this is all for the purpose of the shel rosh, that the shel rosh should be done fully and properly. Is there oich in dem fall mekayim the mitzvah b'shleimusa? So if you put on the shel rosh and the shel yad at the same time, so the shel rosh, the mitzvah of the shel rosh was done b'shleimus. Every moment that the shel rosh was on your body, the shel yad was there as well. There's no halacha of seder, so there was no the seder there wasn't done. The shel rosh and shel yad were done at the same time, but the shleimus of the shel rosh is fulfilled, that the shel rosh is in the body when you have the shel yad. Aber Leuten zweiten Neufen, das ist adin say that anachas adam. But according to the second Neufen, which is that there is a halacha of seder, and the halacha of the seder is on the person. B'shas he's coming to do the mitzvah, there's a certain seder that's required of him how he should do the mitzvah. As friya dafalegen tefillin shel yad and the nacht tefillin shel rosh. First he should put on shel yad and then the shel rosh. So yeshleimar as ot das seder felt demolt when legt ze bevasacha. So then it's possible to say that if you put it on all at the same time, so then the seder is lacking. You have it all together, but you don't have it in the order. The Eibishter wants a certain order, first shel yad, and only following that the shel rosh. So that order is missing. That's the simple nafkemina between these two eifanim. Noch an eifen, but now comes a third way how to interpret this concept, this din, that you have to put on the shel yad first and then the shel rosh. Gimel. Kemen lernen, we can explain this as follows. Das is a din in mitzvahs tefillin. This is an integral din to the very mitzvah of putting on tefillin. Das heißt, this means as follows, as der Seder Anachasan, the order of how a person has to put on the tefillin, der chiyuv hagedime von anachas shel yad, the obligation to put on first the shel yad, is a tail fun mitzvahs tefillin shel yad v'shel rosh. This is part of the mitzvah, how this mitzvah is done. First shel yad and then shel rosh. B'shas mis mechuyev in beide, in a time when you're obligated in both, which is when you have both pairs of tefillin. So yeah, you have the obligation to do both of these mitzvahs. An integral part of the mitzvah is to do it in this eifin. In other words, the Rebbe is negating the two first eifanim. So let's explain this. First of all, it's not just a shleimus in the shel rosh. It's not only focused on the shel rosh. That's number one. Number two, it's not just a seder de gavre, an additional point, an additional halacha regarding the gavre. You have these two mitzvahs. You're fulfilling these two mitzvahs. Now, you have an additional requirement that lies upon you. Do it in this and this seder. No, this is integral to the very mitzvah. Just like we have all the other details of mitzvahs tefillin, whatever they are, there's the requirements regarding the hefts of the mitzvah has to be black, square, whatever it is, and it has to be placed on your arm and not somewhere else in your body. That's not an additional prat of the mitzvah that lies on the gavre, that you should put it on your hands. That's the mitzvah. Put it on your hands, nowhere else in your body. So too, this order is not a pesadova neisef. It's not an additional requirement on the gavre. When you do the mitzvah, do it kach v'kach. Otodos is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to put it in this very order. That's the third eifim. Und die nafkemine la halacha l'maaseh yeshleima. The nafkemine between this and the other eifanim, and the Rabbi here will over here focus on the difference between the third eifin and the first eifin. We can say as follows: Wenn einer hat gelegt die tefillin shel rosh, eider hat gelegt im shel yad. If someone put on the tefillin in the incorrect order, first shel rosh and then shel yad, zi zer mechuyev oistan die tefillin und legen sie noch einmal kesidran. Will he be obligated to remove the tefillin and put the tefillin back on in the right order? Frier tefillin shel yad and then noch shel rosh. And then put it back on in the right order, in the first shel yad, then shel rosh. Oder, es ist genug, as wird noch dem Mont on the tefillin shel yad, or is it enough the fact that he already put on the shel rosh, and let him put on the shel yad, and then once he put on the shel yad, so now he's wearing it, he's wearing both pairs of tefillin, he did not put them on in the right order, but b'diavad, once it's done, it's not necessary to do it over again. Ki yiduat machlokes ha-poskim v'achronim b'zeh. This is a subject which is discussed in Paiskim and Achreinim. So, the Rebbe suggests here now that this is the difference. This could be an afgemina between the third and the first eifin. Leiten ersten eifin, according to the first eifin, as es is a din in the shleimus von mitzvahs tefillin shel rosh. This entire requirement of the order is all for the purpose that the tefillin shel rosh should be done properly. In them, this is an emunachem al roshai. When it's on his head, it has to be together with shel yad there. Darf nicht chaylet sein dem shel rosh. So then, what would be the point of removing the shel rosh? Und es ist maspik as wird antan gleich the tefillin shel yad. The main point is that when the shel rosh is on your body, the shel yad should be there. So you made a mistake, you put on the shel rosh first. So as soon as possible, put on the shel yad to be mashlim, to complete the mitzvah of the shel rosh. But why remove the shel rosh and then put back on the shel yad, put on the shel yad and then the shel rosh? There's no point. Und es wird schon damit, the shleimus a mitzvah for shel rosh. As soon as you'll put on the shel yad, that will be mashlim, the shleimus of the tefillin shel rosh. Leuten dritten Eifen aber. But according to the third Eifen, that the very mitzvah itself is, this order is not some kind of a shleimus in shel rosh or some kind of an additional requirement that's on the gavra to do so and so. This is the very mitzvah of tefillin. Just like you have to put tefillin on this place in your body, it has to be in this order. Let's move on. So obviously, if it was done out of order, so this is not the mitzvah. So you have to remove your tefillin shel rosh, put on the shel yad, and then put on the shel rosh to fulfill the mitzvah the way the mitzvah is. That's a simple nafkemina. Now, regarding the second eifin, which the Rebbe does not bring in here into this nafkemina, will be explained separately in Ozayin. So if now the Rebbe comes back to the limudim to explain the difference between the limud of the Mechilte and the limud of the Gemara. Okay, let's just move out of the sun for a minute. Okay, we're continuing. So the Rebbe says as follows. Und das ist der Chiluk zwischen der limud, kolzman shebene necha yishtayim, was the Gemara learned up. This is the difference between the Gemara that learns out the limud from what it says, v'hayu, kolzman shebene necha yishtayim, as long as you're wearing the tefillin shel rosh, you should have both, as long as you're wearing the tefillin shel rosh, you should have also the shel yad on your body, right? And on the limud and mechilte, mikan amru, mitzvahs tefillin, but the mechilte says that the mitzvah of tefillin is kashu neisen shel yad, v'achkach neisen shel rosh, kashu chayles cholo. The limud that it says in the Gemara, kozman shebein necha, as long as you have the tefillin shel rosh between your eyes, yishtayim. So you have to have two pairs, two tefillins. Meint, ados is adin in tefillin shel rosh. The language of the Gemara is very clear. This entire requirement is all for the shleimus of the shel rosh. Those was mit auf maktiv sein, dit is tefillin shel yad. Yishtayim, the fact that you have to have the tefillin shel yad first. So there should be two, is negates the shleimus mitzvah tefillin shel rosh, shebein necha, kozman shebein necha. It's all regarding the shleimus of the bein necha, of the shel rosh. Very clear. Ubemele b'shas as hiktim, tefillin shel rosh or tefillin shel yad. If one put the tefillin shel rosh before the shel yad, is maspik da noch from tefillin shel yad denach. So it would be enough that you should immediately go and put on your shel yad. Und damit is a shem mekayim, und damit is the shem mikanu la'abam mekayim the chiyuv and kozman shebein necha yishtayim, and then you'll fulfill from here going forward the shleimus. You didn't have the shleimus the first moment when you put on the shel rosh first, but you'll have the shleimus as soon as you put on the shel yad. There would be no reason to remove the shel rosh and then put on the shel yad first. Is the limud, but according to the mechilta, what's the limud? And you see it in the emphasis, in the words of the mechilta, mikan amru, mitzvahs tefillin. What is the mitzvah of tefillin? Der geder from mitzvahs tefillin is ba'oifin as kashu neisen shel yad v'achkach neisen shel rosh. It could only happen in a way that you put on the shel yad first and then the shel rosh. That is the very mitzvah. That's why the mechilta emphasizes these words, mitzvahs tefillin. It doesn't say about beinei necha. He says this is the mitzvah. As Akdam shel yad in Seder Anachasan is a din in mitzvahs tefillin. This is one of the din regarding the very mitzvah of tefillin itself. Ubemele b'shas hiktim tefillin shel rosh. If you by mistake put on shel rosh first, felt der din b'mitzvahs tefillin. He's missing a part of the very mitzvah. Und darf chaylet sein and ontan kesideron. So he has to remove the tefillin shel rosh and then put on the shel yad first and then the shel rosh. So that's very clear, the difference between the Gemara and the Mechilta. And now the Rebbe will come to the Sifri, but before that the Rebbe will first bring us into the Sifri by bringing the second oifin and bringing it back to this nafkemina that the Rebbe is speaking about if a person by mistake put on the shel rosh first. Leuten zweiten oifin now. So according to the second oifin that we said, ados is adin nor in seder anachas tefillin al yedei adam. It's not an integral part of the mitzvah itself. Rather, you have two mitzvahs here. Put on the shel rosh, put on the shel yad, and the Torah comes and tells the person when you're going to go and do this mitzvah. There's an additional requirement that relies upon you to put it on in this order. So here there's room to think about this. You can analyze. In other words, it's not very clear. See, this is not a t'nai. Prat and Seder Adam. Is it just a condition, a detail that's in the order that the person puts it on? Und das hat nicht kein Sheiches zu the mitzvahs tefillin, and it's not at all related to the mitzvah itself. It's not at all ma'akiv the mitzvah itself. The mitzvah is the mitzvah. Put on tefillin shel yad, put on tefillin shel rosh. Then the Torah comes and tells you, you're doing this mitzvah, so you do it this and this in this order. But it's not related to the mitzvah itself at all. The Rebbe continues, and so therefore, since it's only a condition, an additional condition, a davar neisef that lies upon the person. So since it's only a condition, v'roiv t'naya mitzvah is this efshe nidli kuva. So like many conditions, or most conditions that you find regarding mitzvahs, so possibly it's not even something which will be ma'akiv the mitzvah. The mitzvah, it's not a must. That if you don't do it in this order, so then the mitzvah will not be, you have to do it over. The Eibishter wants you to do it over. Since it's only a t'nai relating to the gavre, that when you do the mitzvah, do it in this order, but it's not related to the mitzvah itself. So this could be a t'nai, that the Eibishter wanted you to do it in this item, but it's not leikova. It's not a must. If you put on the shel rosh first, is maspik as a legen nach dem tefillin shel yad, and is the mekayim mitzvahs tefillin kedeboy, and then you put on the shel yad afterwards, and at this point it's too late. You already put on the shel rosh, and you do the mitzvah properly. The t'nai, the Eibishter wanted an additional thing from you that you should put on the shel yad first, but if you didn't do it, the mitzvah itself is not going to be affected by it. The mitzvah itself is totally fulfilled. Or perhaps we could say, as their din in Seder Anachasan, this din, so it's taka din in the Seder, in the order of how you put it on. However, that order is relevant for the fulfillment of the mitzvah later, as das was the tefillins and a nachtem und nachem is a hemshech von a hanache von tefillin shel rosh on der akdamas tefillin shel yad. So the tefillin lying upon him, if you put it on first in the right and wrong order, first shel rosh and then shel yad, so every moment that he's wearing the tefillin that will put on in the wrong order. It didn't just fly onto his hands. He put it onto his hands. So even later being on his body, so he's fulfilling the mitzvah. Now he's wearing the tefillin. But Hayyesa was done lechatchila in the wrong order. That t'nai regarding the order and the action of how you put it on is going to be relevant every single moment later. It's ma'akev even for later. So if so, you would have to remove it and put it back on in the right order if you put on the shel rosh first. In other words, the Rebbe says in this eifin that it's a t'nai noisef on the gavre. There's a suffix here. So what kind of t'nai is this? Is this a t'nai li'ikuva or is it not a t'nai li'ikuva? So that's something which you can say in two efanim. And here's the difference between the beginning of the Gemara and what it says in the Sifri. The Eshloimar, as the mitvos the Gemara sagt. This will explain what the Gemara says in the beginning when it starts explaining the source. So first the Gemara brings the source from Uksharta and V'hoda V'hoyelet Etofis, the order in the pasuk. And the Gemara asks him that, but that's only a source for putting on the tefillin. It's not a source for taking off the tefillin. And then the Gemara says, Rav Huna asbereli. Rav Huna explained me. In other words, he clarified this concept to me. The Rebbe emphasizes asbera, that Rav Huna was magdir. He defined what's going on over here. As akdomas chalitzes shel rosh. Learn ichareis from them was omakra v'hoyle tetavis beinenecha kozman shebeinenecha yishtayim. That true, I could only learn out this halacha of removing the order, of removing the tefillin from an additional drasha, from the drasha of Ahayu. So what is he clarifying with this? Is the Gemara mefarish? With this, the Gemara explains as the erste limud, b'negei the seder anocha. The first limud the Gemara brought regarding the order of how to put on the tefillin. Kishum meniach shel yad v'achkach meniach shel rosh. Dichsiv v'kshartem lo yisla yadecha v'hodar v'hoyelet tafis beinenecha. The order of v'kshartem and then v'hoyelet tafis. That's the order in the seder of how you put it on. Is nor atnai in Maisa ha'anocha shel ha'gavra. It's only a condition in the action and at that moment when you are coming to put it on. That then you're going to put on. The Torah says, wait, we want you to do it in this way. Unit in din for mitzvah tefillin gufa, but it has no relevance to the actual mitzvah of tefillin itself. It's not related to the mitzvah itself, meaning later, if you put it on in the wrong order, the shel rosh and then the shel yad, now you have the mitzvah, it's on your body, you have the mitzvah kiddaboy. When you were coming to put it on, so the Torah has an additional requirement that it's requesting from the Gavra, do it in this order. But that's not relevant later. To the mitzvah of tefillin itself, it has no bearing whatsoever. And therefore it's not li'kuva. If you put it on in the wrong order, you wouldn't have to change it. So mitzvah tefillin is blois negei the prat, as kozman shebeinei necha yishtayim. So Rav Huna explained that you're right. The Gemara had a question from Ukshartem, and then it says the is the order. So how does that teach me anything regarding the chalitza, regarding taking off the tefillin? So Rav Huna explained, Rabbi, you're actually right. From there, you can't learn out anything regarding past the point of the hanocha. This is a specific seder regarding putting on the tefillin, and it's not ma'akev, it's not relevant for any time later than that. Elamai, so what's the pshat that later when it is negayah, that when you remove the tefillin, you should remove the shel rosh first. So came Rav Huna and brought a new drasha, Vahayu, and Vahayu is a drasha legabi the shel rosh, that we learn out that the shleimus of the shel rosh is that it should only be on the body when the shel yad is there. That's what Rav Huna was explaining him. In other words, the Gemara goes in the first eifin that the Rebbe said here, that it's not ma'akiv, if it's only a seder in the Hanachas HaGavra. When I've them come to the Esaf and Sifri. And here is where we see the addition and the different approach that the Sifri has. And this is all in the second eif. If we're going to say that it's a din in the Seder HaNocha, that the Torah wants the Gavra, you're doing this mitzvah. When you're coming to do this mitzvah, do it in this Seder. So that's the approach of the Sifri. But the Sifri argues in the Gemara. The Sifri is learning it out from the order in the pasuk. And it's a halacha on the Gavra, in the order of how he should put it on. Kozman, shel yad b'yad, ten shel rosh b'rosh. Mikan amru k'shenoisen tefillin, noisen shel yad chila, v'achar kach shel rosh. We learn from this pasuk the order. First put on the shel yad and then put on the shel rosh. And here the Sifri says different. And the Rebbe comes back and contrasts this with the Gemara. Loi, the Gemara is nor negeya, as they zoln zaymun nochem al roshoi, kol zman shebein necha yishtayim. The Gemara's conclusion is the only way we could explain regarding removing the tefillin, why you have to remove the shel rosh and then the shel yad, is if we're going to say that it's negeya then, because this is a halach in the shel rosh. The seder of the beginning that we would learn out from a kshartam and then the v'hoyle tetafos is only relevant, that's a din neisaf on the gavra that's relevant then when he's coming to do that action. But it has no bearing on later, to the very mitzvah of tefillin itself, once it's on his body. It's not liyakuvah then. So therefore the Gemara says, there's a different drasha, v'hoyu. Das heißt, the Akdama from tefillin shel yad is nor bichdei, as es soll sein shtayim, kol zman shebein necha. That's the conclusion of the Gemara. That it's only geya for the tefillin shel rosh. Aber leuten Sifri. But according to the Sifri remains with the first drasha of the Gemara, kshartam, and it learns out from kshartam for both, for the order when you put it on and for when you take it off. The Sifri doesn't have charata from that first drasha like the Gemara that Rav Huna Asber, Rav Huna explained, oh, you're right, we need a different drasha. It's tefillin shel rosh negeya, so it's relevant for the mitzvah of tefillin shel rosh, nitnor, as the tefillin shel rosh on zay menachim, then euch the tefillin shel yad zay menachim. It's not only a shleimus in the shel rosh, that the shel rosh should be on your body when the shel yad is on your body, nor euch der seder, v'oifen von 10 shel rosh berosh, und der riber neisen shel yad chila. This order of putting on the shel yad first, and then the shel rosh is relevant also for later, kedez lo kenen zayin kedeboy der 10 shel rosh berosh, when you're wearing the tefillin shel rosh, later. So the seder of the hanach in the beginning is ma'akiv also for later when you're wearing the shel rosh. That every moment that I'm wearing the shel rosh that was placed on my body in the order of the shel yad first and then the shel rosh, so then the shel rosh is lying on my body behemshich to that right order. If it's not on my body in that right order, so then the shel rosh is not on my body in the right order. So the seder hanach is negeya every single moment. It's negeya constantly that the shel rosh should be after the shel yad. Umemele, it's negay also when it comes to the moment of removing the tefillin, that because we see the Torah made this seder, that shel yad first and then shel rosh, so that means that the shel yad has to be on the body before the shel rosh. So you can't have the shel rosh on the body without the shel yad. So it's take a halach in the seder, right? And that's why the Sifri is madgish this seder of tchila, which it does not say in the mechilta. But that halacha of the seder is not just negeya then at that moment when you're putting on the tefillin. From this seder we learn out that it's likuve and it's negeya also later that the shel rosh should not be on the body without the shel yad. So therefore the Sifri remains with the original drasha of the Gemara, ukshartam. It doesn't follow up like the Gemaras did, like Rav Huna brought another drasha from Vahoyu. So we have over here the three Eifanim. The Gemara that it's a shleimus in the tefillin shel rosh, the Mechilta that it's integral to the very mitzvah of tefillin, and the Sifri that learns tchila that this is all a halacha in the seder to put on the shel yad first and then the shel rosh, and that's relevant throughout the time when he's wearing the tefillin until when he's removing the tefillin. Al pi kala na zeich move on. So according to all of this we understand. Was the Mechilta lernt es heraus von ersten pasuk bepashtes kadesh v'hoyel chalayos al yadcha. Why the Mechilta chooses to learn out this halacha, that this is integral to the very mitzvah, from the pasuk that it says in Parshas Kadesh, on euch nit, and not in Kshartam in this week's parsha, on euch nit from pasuk v'hayel ois yadcha in pasuk v'hayeki v'yacha b'seif Parshas Bay, and not even in the pasuk of v'hayeki v'yacha, which is at the end of Parshas Bay. Leite Mechilta. So the reason is as follows. According to the Mechilta, v'balt, as der seder an achasan is adin b'mitzvahs tefillin. The order of putting on the tefillin is integral to the very mitzvah. This is what the mitzvah itself is, part of the mitzvah. Nid blois adin in der maisa nacha von gavre. It's not just an additional din when you come to do the mitzvah, that it lies upon the gavre to do it in this and this order. Other in the shleimus mitzvah tefillin shel rosh. And it's also not just the appropriate and complete way of how to fulfill the mitzvah of shel rosh. Was the Rebbe is der Lashna Mechilta Mikan Omru Mitzvahs Tefillin Kishenoisen Shel Yad Vachkach Noisen Shel Rosh. As we said before, the Mechilta is emphasizing this is the mitzvah of Tefillin. Und sagt nicht bekitze, mit kein Omre neusen Shalyat Chila, and he doesn't say like it says in the Sifri, put on the Shalyat first. Weil der Chiyuv, zum Magde sein der Shalyat, is nicht bloß a Tnai, Kedei, as der Noch soll sein, der Kozman shebeine Necha Yishtayim. It's not just a condition in order that later you should have both Beinei Necha Shtayim, like according to the Gemara, that it's a Shleimus in the Shorosh, or that a Tnai ba'oifin ten Shorosh b'rosh, or that from this Seder we see that when you put on the Shorosh, so the Seder should be that the Shorosh should come after the Shalyad. Not a din in mitzvah tefillin. It's a din, it's integral to the very mitzvah. This is a part of the mitzvah tefillin itself. That this is the way it's done. First Shalyad and then Shorosh. Der Pfarrer lernt man das ab von dem Zivui auf mitzvah tefillin zum ersten Mal. So therefore, this is learned out from the very first time that the Torah writes the mitzvah of tefillin. Was von dem versteht man, als zusammen mit dem Etze mitzvah ist gesagt geworden, dem den Ikri beha mitzvah. The very first time that the Torah tells us the mitzvah, it tells us this order because this is a part of the mitzvah of tefillin. According to the Gemara, we're learning it out from a later pasuk because it's an additional detail regarding the shleimus of the Shorosh and so on. But the Mechilta is learning it out dafka from this first pasuk because this is integral to the mitzvah itself. The first time the Torah says it says it, how it should be done. Yesh lahaisef, we could add another detail here, as they're mocker of them, as thus is mitzvah tefillin. The source for this, of the Mechilta, that this order is part of the very mitzvah of tefillin itself. Adin in the mitzvah gufe is nid blois mitzadem seder akosov. It's not only because of the order, that the way the pasuk says, first v'hayel chalayis yatcha and then lezikarim beninecha. No mitzad lashon akosov. We could also see this in the language of the pasuk itself. From them pasuk v'hayel chalayis yatcha or lezikarim beninecha. V'lei nemar, and it doesn't say v'hayu lezikarim beninecha. It doesn't say again v'hayu. It says v'hayu l'chala oisa yadcha ulizikarim beninecha. Continuation. It doesn't say a second time v'hayu. Let it pin up. We learn out in Rishainim. This is brought in the Rishainim. Sheshteyem nechshavim la'avoye v'asiya achas. Both of these mitzvahs are considered to be one action, one entity, that you're doing one thing here. That's the drasha that it says in the Rishainim. Aber lahalacha. In halacha b'poil, how do we paskin? Was das is leute deye as me lernt up the seder anachas fillen von ukshart and v'hayil tetafis. La halacha we follow the Gemara that learns it out not from the pasuk v'hayil chalayis hayatcha, but we learn it out from this week's parsha kshart and v'hayil tetafis. Zen nechshavim la havoye v'asiya achas. Yes, they are considered to be one action, one entity. Not in them inyan shetzarach letoichvan zula chazu b'loishim hefsek. In this sense, just in this sense, regarding the order that when you put them on one right after the other in this order, and also over here we're focusing on the fact that it should be put on without a break, without any hefsek of speaking or any other hefsek between them. But it's not really one entity, it's not really one action. It's two separate mitzvahs, two separate things. Elamai, you should put it without a hefsek. So we have over here the diuk in the pasuk v'hayla chalayis hayatchal is a karam beninecha. It doesn't say a second v'haya. So does that mean that it becomes a havaya v'siya achas? We're learning out that it's one mitzvah, it's one entity, or no? It's two different mitzvahs, but it's just one in the sense that you don't make a break between these two mitzvahs. As the Rabbi brings over here in the Oster, there's this discussion regarding the mitzvah of tefillin, if it's one mitzvah or two mitzvahs. La halacha we paskin that it's two different mitzvahs. Aber leute mechilte zene beida anoches a havaya v'siachas legamri. According to the mechilte, we look at this pasuk literally, that because it doesn't say a second vahayu, it's considered to be one entity and one action. From them is bederach mamela verstandig. So therefore, according to the Mechilte, it's automatically understood. As b'shas erat mishanege, when them say that if he changes the order, is this nit the havaya v'asiachas shebekosov. So it's not this entity, it's not this that the pasuk writes. So therefore he's going to have to remove the tefillin shorosh if it was put on first and put it on in the right order. So if you look at the very pasuk itself, when it writes the order, it's not just writing the order of number 1 and number 2. It's writing it in a way that it doesn't create a number 2. It doesn't say a second v'hoyu. It says put on this and this together. It's one thing. So therefore this is the very mitzvah. First the shalyad and then the shorosh. And therefore the Mechilte says this emphasis mitzvah tefillin. This is the very mitzvah of tefillin. Alle in Yonim von Nigle de Teire zenen da wie sie drücken sich heiß bepnimiyas Teire. You have them as they're expressed also in the pnimiyas of Teire. Adarabe den Yonim in Nigle werden the stalsche von dem wie sie zenen bepnimiyas. It's not only that it's also in Pnimius, on the contrary, everything that exists in Nigla and Halacha evolves from its source, from the way it is in the Pnimius. Al derech zeh ben Yaneinu, the same is here as well. It says, Huksha kol ha-Torah kula le-tefillin. We know the entire Torah is compared to tefillin. It's geschehen wie in tefillin zene faran, tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel rosh. Just like regarding tefillin, you have the two mitzvahs, shel yad and shel rosh. Azay zene neuchen der Aveide von Torah mitzvahs faran, die zwei beginnes von tefillin. So too, more broadly speaking, regarding all the Torah mitzvahs, you have the two parts of a person's Aveide, which are resembled in the tefillin shel yad and the shel rosh. Shel yad was melekt auf in zroya keneged dalev. The shel yad that's placed on the arm, right across the heart. Vaist of der Aveda shebelev refers to the person's Aveda in his heart, Yiras Hashem, Kabbalah Seil. Und Shorosh, was Hanachasa is Keneged HaMoyach, the Shorosh placed on the head of the person, right on the brain, Vaist of der Aveda von Seichel, Havana Vasag, refers to the Aveda that's done in a person's Seichel with his understanding. Und wie das ist Mudgish in der Dim bim Nigle b'Shulchan Aruch, as this is also emphasized even in Nigle and the Halach and Shulchan Aruch, as Kiyum Mitzvahs Tefillin is, to fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin, an integral part of the mitzvah is the kavana. Leha nicham al azraya, to put it on your hand, keneged alev, on your arm, that is, across your heart, valaroish keneged amayach, and on your head, near your brain. Kedei sheniskay nisim v'neflois she'asi imanu, to remember the miracles the Eibishter performed with us, she'em meidem al yechudai, which show on the Eibishter's unity, v'asheloy hakayach v'mamshala, and the power, the control the Eibishter has on everything. And v'yishabed, a person should subjugate himself, la kadosh baruch Hu, to the Eibishter. And this v'yishabed, it's part of the mitzvah. As the Rebbe brings in the Ha'ara, that a person has to, it's not just a kavanah to think about this, but to actually mentally and experience a shibut, to really be mishat, to subjugate himself to the Eibishter. Shi b'mayach, to the Eibishter. So he should be mishabet to the Eibishter. His neshama, ha-neshama shi b'mayach, his neshama which is in his brain, and v'gam taivus ha-machshavais libe, and also the desires and thoughts in your heart, la v'dasi yizbarach, to serve the Eibishter. V'yidei anochas tefillin, yisker es habayri yizbarach, by putting on tefillin, so you remember the Eibishter, you have the awareness and the connection in your mind, and v'yamet hana-yisav, and you'll minimize your pleasures that are in the heart. So now taking these two aspects of Tefillin Shel Yad and Tefillin Shel Rosh, applying it to a person's Aveda more broadly, so these are the 2 points of Hergish, Midas Shebelev, the feelings in the person's heart, and so on. Mitzvahs, which refers to mitzvahs, all the mitzvahs of a person that you have to do. Tefillin Shel Yad, that's related to Tefillin Shel Yad. Und Teire, and then learning Teire, where a person primarily uses his mind, Tefillin Shel Rosh. That's hinted in Tefillin Shel Rosh. So now the Rebbe will explain how we apply this back to the order of the mitzvah, putting on first Shel Yad and then the Shel Rosh. Und auf dem sind dort zwei Reis. And regarding this, there are 2 different instructions here. Kishu maniach Shel Yad, v'achar kach maniach Shel Rosh, tichsev chulu. The first thing is that the order of putting on the tefillin. First put on the Shel Yad and then put on the Shel Rosh. What does this mean? As yiras chetoi dav zayin kidemes lechachmasai. The yiras chet, when a person puts on the tefillin across his heart, the feelings, to have the Kabbalah Soil and the yiras shemayim, that comes before the chachma, the Torah that he learns. Yira is tara lechachma. The yira of a yid, that's the gateway to enter into being able to learn Torah properly, the chachma of the Eibishter. Whereas Mevai Barucha in Tanya, this is explained in Tanya at length, as Reishis HaAveda v'Ikra v'Sharsha, the beginning and the source and the basis of a Yid's Aveda is L'oire Tchila Yira Tivis HaMesuteres B'Leiv Kol Yisrael, to awaken, to inspire in yourself, to feel the Yira, the awe that a Yid has, that's dear in your heart, the natural awe a Yid has for the Eibishter, Shalei Limrud B'Melech Malcha Melech HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not to rebel, but to stand in awe in front of the Eibishter. That is the source, that's the beginning. That's the Tefillin Shel Yad first. And then you can come, that's a gateway to enter into the Hemshech of the Aveda with the Tefillin Shel Rosh. That's the first lesson. Danach kommt die zweite Hecher. Then comes the second and more important and more powerful lesson on a higher level. Kozman shebeinei necha yiyu shtayim. Regarding the Tefillin Shel Rosh. This is the shleimus in the Tefillin Shel Rosh, that when you have the Tefillin Shel Rosh, the shleimus of that mitzvah is shtayim, that you also have the Shel Yad. What does this mean? As the Aveda von Yira fadet sich, nit nur als Hagdame zu limudat Torah, the Yira that a Yid has to have of the Eibishter is not only there in the beginning as an introduction, as a gateway to enter, to learn Torah properly, not as ich b'shas and zusammen mit dem Limud Torah. While and together with your learning, Avodah shebeseichel, Havana, Asagin, Elokos, when a person is learning and understanding, learning words of Torah, godliness, darf euch sein die Avodah von Yireh. Even then, he has to have the Yireh, the fear of Hashem. And only then will the Chachma that he's learning remain with him. So it's not just an introduction, but it's also part of the attitude of the person while he's learning. Und durch den kommt man zu noch a hechere Darge in Yireh. When a person learns Torah with this approach, with this right attitude, so then you come to a higher level of Yireh. Wie die was kommt als Akdame zu Torah. A higher level of Yireh than the Yireh that you have before, as an introduction to your learning. So and you come to this higher level of Yireh through the very learning itself. Und es wird gesagt, im ein Chachme, ein Yireh. If you don't have Chachme first, you can't come to this higher level of Yireh. So this is not the Yireh that's a gateway to enter to Chachme, the basic Kabbalah soil, the intrinsic Kabbalah soil that a Yid has in his heart to reveal that, to be able to learn Torah properly. But then when you actually learn Torah and you continue with the attitude of Yireh while you're learning, so you're learning, connecting to the Lakus and the Torah, this will then bring you to a higher level of Yireh, following your Chachme. For das is the Darge von Yireh law. Through learning, you come to a higher level of Yireh. Was wird nimshach dafke nach der Avodah von Chachme, which is drawn down and comes after a person learns the Chachme, the Eibishter's Torah, kemavur ba'aruch and Chassidus, as it's explained in length in Chassidus. The first level of Yireh comes from below, what a person could reveal in himself. That's Yireh Tata. And then when you learn Torah, and the Eibishter's words, the Chachme of the Eibishter enters into your mind, you draw down a higher level of Yireh through this. So these are the two instructions, the 2 points that it says over here in this mitzvah of putting the tefillin shel yad before the tefillin shel rosh. One is the introduction of having the Yireh first, and then there's the Yireh while you're learning Torah, and even actually following the learning of Torah, that calls man shebein enecha yishtaim, you come to the shleimus of Yireh. And over here we add another point. As das was hanochas tefillin shel yad darf sein far hanochas tefillin shel rosh. This halacha that the tefillin shel yad has to be put on before the shel rosh. Yirasei kidemes l'chachmasei. The Yireh comes before Chachma. Is nit nor weil darf sein the seder in anhagas ha'adam. It's not only this is the order and the avodah of a person, that if you're coming to serve the Eibishter, so you have to come with the right attitude, with the right bittul, with the right approach, to learn Torah with the right attitude. As kedei zuzukommen zu shleimus von tefillin shel rosh, Chachma von Torah, in order to really put on tefillin shel rosh, which is the Chachma, in order to learn Torah properly, which is godliness. So you have to have the introduction to prepare yourself properly with the right mindset, and that will give you the kayach to learn Torah properly, and that Torah that you learn should stick, should remain with you, should stay in your mind. And which brings us also to the second point of while you're learning Torah, to learn with the right attitude of Yireh, that you're learning the Eibishter's Torah. Und durch dem kommt dazu, zu noch a hechere Shleimus, as we said, you come to an even higher level of Shleimus. Im ein Chachma and Yireh, that if you don't have Chachma, you don't have Yireh, meaning that after your Chachma, you come to a higher level of Yireh, es wird dann ilui euch in der Madrege von Tefillin shel yad. You get elevated even higher than the Yireh that you had when you put on the Tefillin shel yad first. After you put on the shel rosh, you come to an additional level of Yireh that's even higher, as we said before. So those are the 2 points that we said before, but it's not only this. Or the Seder Gufe is an inyan fun mitzvahs tefillin. This order is part and parcel of the very mitzvah of tefillin itself. This is how the mitzvah is done. It's not for a specific purpose, as a hagdame or as a certain shleimus. Before you learn Torah, following learning Torah, you come to one level, Yireh Tata, Yireh Yilah, but it goes together. The Seder of Shel Yad and Shel Rosh is integral to the very mitzvah itself, as the Rabbi will explain. Das heißt, this would mean as follows. Das was man legt frier, Tefillin Shel Yad. The fact that we put on Tefillin Shel Yad first is weil euch das is an Iker und es ist da in dem am Meile. It's because the Tefillin Shel Yad belongs to be first. It's not just as an introduction, that you're heading to the Chachma. That's the main focus. You want to learn Chachma, which is a lakos. That's a revelation from above, and that's the real connection. The Shel Yad is an introduction to have the basic Kabbalah soil to allow you to connect to the Torah. That's the approach we have till here. So according to this pshat, really the Shel Yad is on a lower level. The chachma of the Torah is the main focus. You're going to learn the Eibishter's words of Torah, lekos. Elamai, you have to have the Shal Yad first as an introduction to lead you in, as a gateway, to bring you into the Torah. But the emes is no. The fact that the Shal Yad is first is because in the Shal Yad itself, being first is actually a maila in the Shal Yad. Vibalt, as Kabbalah soil, yira, the Kabbalah soil that you start with. Afila yira tata, even if it's a level of yira tata, a low level of yira, the basic Kabbalah soil that a person reveals from his neshama, is in yana bittul. The basis of yira, what does awe of Hashem mean? That you lose yourself. That the greatness of the Eibishter and the presence of the King, you lose yourself. You mevatli yourself. That's the essence of yira. Heipach hayeshes, the opposite of a person saying, here, I am, I exist. Hatzi ha-shayches zu bittul atzmi von etzem ha-nefesh bechinas yichidische benefesh. The point of this yira, although the actual level of the yira, the recognition that the yira is based on, the feeling of the yira might still be in a very beginner's level and the basic Kabbalah soil, but the essence of the yira, the point of the yira, which is the bittul, the fact that the person puts himself aside here, that he loses himself, that essence is the same as the highest level of Yirei Allah, which comes from the Yechidische Benefesh, from the deepest part of a person's neshama, which is absolutely batel to Hashem. The nekuda of nisht ich, the nekuda of negating yourself, that nekuda is the same. The quantity, the quality, to what extent it's applied to you, to what extent you feel it, there's various levels to this. But the essence of the nekuda of nisht ich, of negating yourself, is there, and you have that maila when you put on the tefillin shal yad, even in Yirei Tata. Was is hecher from the avodah from tefillin shal rosh, and therefore in that sense, this is higher than the avodah of tefillin shal rosh, which is about you learning and understanding, using your brain in your mitzias to understand and bring the Eibishter into you, not bittul. And this is connected to the word of the Baal Shem Tov wegen hanochas tefillin shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, regarding the Eibishter putting on tefillin. Frier tefillin shel yad and nachdem tefillin shel rosh, in the same order as we put on the tefillin. First, the tefillin shel yad and then the tefillin shel rosh. So the Baal Shem Tov explained, in tefillin shel Maila, by the tefillin by the Eibishter, which is the Rebbe brings in the Ha'ara, the tefillin of the Eibishter is all about praising the Yidden, is the shel yad merames of der avodah von anashim pshutim. The shel yad is hinting the mile of the Yidden, the mile of the simple Yidden, that have the simple Kabbalah soil, that negate themselves and annul themselves for the will of Hashem. Und der shel rosh, der avodah von Bali Torah. And the shel rosh is the praise of those Yidden that learn and understand Torah. Und in anochas, tefillin shel Maila, when the Eibishter puts on tefillin, is the avodah be Kabbalah soil von anashim pshutim frier. The avodah of the simple people, the simple Kabbalah soil, that comes first. It's first because it's higher. Hecher from the avodah from the Bali Meichen in Yidiyah v'asagas HaTorah. They are higher and they are greater than those people that learn and understand and comprehend the Eibishter's Torah. That's the Maila. That's the reason why the Tefillin Shal Yad is being put on first. It's not just as an introduction. It's not as a certain seder in the Hanhaga of the Gavre that because of our shortcomings, because we're so low and we have a Nefesh Bahamis, so in order to have the right attitude in Torah, so you have to have the Akdama of the Shal Yad before the Shal Rosh. No, that's not the Pshat. The Pshat over here is that this is the very way, this is how the mitzvah is done. The Shal Yad has to come first, because the Shal Yad Taka has a Maila. It comes before the Shal Rosh. And then the Rebbe goes even deeper. And al yidei kol zeh vert oivgeton mitzvahs tefillin b'shleimusa. This brings you to fulfill the mitzvah, the shleimus. In this seder of the Shal Yad first brings you to the shleimus of the mitzvah as vert havoye vasiya achas. Then when you put on the Shal Rosh, it all becomes one entity. Durch dem, was in der Madrege von tefillin Shal Yad herzig, der Iyun von achas, b'chines yichide. Although tefillin shel yad externally simply seems to be just like the lower level, the Kabbalah soil of the person that's on a beginner's level, just to enter. But really, if you sense and you see what it is in truth, that be'emes, even that anach of tefillin shel yad, that Kabbalah soil is the deepest bittul. It's connected to the bittul of the very essence of the neshama, of the achas, poiltos, dem achas, oichen tefillin shel rosh. So then the tefillin shel rosh, which is in the avodah from Bali Meichen and Yediyah v'asagas HaTorah, even when you come to learning, and here you are using your mitzias, it is with your comprehension. But if you start with the tefillin shel yad first, that will transform also your learning, that your learning should be with that yichida, with that very same bittul that's there when you put on the shel yad. So therefore this is integral to the very mitzvah itself. This changes everything. The Shal Yad in the beginning is not just there because of a certain chesaron. The Shal Yad is be'emes supposed to be there first, because that is revealing the Yechida. That Kabbalah soil, that Yirat Tata, is the deepest bittul that's really there. And then we bring that bittul into the Shlorash afterwards, that even when you are using your Metzias to understand and think and learn Torah, it should be permeated with this very same achas, with this very same bittul of Yechida Shebenefesh. It becomes one entity. Your Kabbalah soil, your learning, your Metzias is all fully permeated with the Yechida Shebenefesh. Und durch der Aveda von Achas is men mamshich in Welt echad, through this Aveda of doing the mitzvah of tefillin this way, and Bechlal, our Aveda of Torah mitzvahs in this way, we draw into the world the Eibishter, the Echad, Kemaimer, as the statement that it says in the Gemara, Tefillin the Marialme Maksivbu. What does it say in the Eibishter's Tefillin? Umi Chamcha Yisrael Goy Echad Ba'aretz. Who's like the Yidden, the Eibishter's nation, one nation in this world? Yidden's and Mamshech, and the pshat of this, as it says, is that Yidden draw down into the world the Mavaya Echad Ba'aretz, the Eibishter Avaya Echad here in the world below.